All right, this is a short little video to review the role of the government in a market economy. It has a limited role, but a very, very important one. Number one, has four roles. Number one, it provides the legal structure. For example, it provides the legal status of a business. You can go and register articles of incorporation and create a corporation. An immortal entity that can own things and do stuff. It's not real; it's imagined, but its power is real, and the government it sets up the system for doing that. We've already talked about property rights. The government sets up the system whereby you record the deeds to show you own real estate. Also, the government provides and maintains property right protection for intellectual property, patents, copyrights, trademarks. It provides a set of laws governing contracts. If I hire you to come put a roof on my house and you do it, then I don't pay you, I have violated that contract law, and you can take me to court and compel me to pay. It provides the courts as well. It provides a medium of exchange, currency. Trade in a market economy wouldn't be very effective without a neutral medium of exchange. And finally, it guarantees product quality. You can't sell fake products that are so common in China. You can't fill a toothpaste tube with mud and sell it as toothpaste. That's illegal. All of these things are essential to maintaining the legal structure that allows the market economy to function. Secondly, it maintains competition. We've talked about this. Competition is essential to innovation and to choice. And sometimes monopolists use their power to oppress, and the government steps in and engages in antitrust activity to compel monopolies not to do that. It's important. Third, it redistributes income. That sounds very socialist. I suppose in some ways it is, but some redistribution must occur so the economy doesn't grind to a halt, and the government is essential in doing that. One way it does is through transfer payments. That simply means transferring money from one person to another. I take a young person's taxes and use those taxes to pay a Social Security pension to an old person. Also things like food stamps and other benefits for the poor. Market intervention. Sometimes the government will step in and set minimum and maximum prices. That is a form of income redistribution as well. Usually not a great idea. We'll talk more about that when we talk about price controls and supply and demand. Taxation is obviously a redistribution of income. If I take a higher tax rate on a billionaire, I use some of that money to fund public schools, which provide free education to poor children whose parents perhaps pay little or no taxes. That is redistribution of income, although very beneficial. The fourth way in which government demonstrates its role in a market economy is called reallocating resources. It takes a little bit more explanation. Reallocating resources means taking resources from one individual or group or sector and putting them somewhere else. It's akin to redistributing income. And the way it does this, the way government does this, is by dealing with externalities in public goods. So we have to take a minute to kind of define what these are. An externality is a spillover effect to someone other than a buyer and a seller involved in a transaction. Buyer and seller make their exchange, but there's a spillover effect to people external to the transaction. These can be both negative and positive. Since I write poorly on the screen, I'm going to abbreviate these very shortly. The classic example of a negative externality is pollution. Let's say we have a tanning factory in China. It takes animal hides and turns them into leather. And people buy cheap leather goods at Target. They're happy. The buyers are happy. The sellers in China are happy. However, let's say that, and this is a real example actually. Let's say that tanning factory dumps waste into the river that it is next to, and that river that waste pollutes the river downstream and kills the fish, and therefore destroys the livelihood of 10,000 fishermen who for generations have made their living with the fish. Well, they weren't a part of the leather transaction. They were external to it, but they're hurt by it. That is a negative externality, pollution. Another would be secondhand smoke. Buyer and seller of tobacco are happy, but someone external to that transaction gets cancer because of secondhand smoke. That's a classic negative. What do we do? How does government reallocate resources and address this problem? Simple. It taxes negative externalities quite heavily. You got to raise revenue somewhere. Why not tax negative things like this to discourage them from happening, and raise revenue to, perhaps fight pollution and/or secondhand smoke? A classic example of a positive externality is education. How is that a positive externality? Well, if the receiver of the education, the students, and the giver of the education, the school system, they're involved in the transaction, but there are people with no kids and no relation to the educational system that benefit from it. How? Well, people that are educated have a much less likelihood of becoming criminals. They're going to have better health practices. They're going to drive better. Society will have a ton of positive external benefits from this transaction. So what do we, vaccines would be another good example of a positive externality. People who are not vaccinated will likely not catch the disease if everyone else is vaccinated. The giver and the receiver of the vaccine, the positive benefits extend beyond them to people who aren't vaccinated because they're less likely to come in contact with the disease. So that's another positive externality. How does government reallocate resources in regard to a positive externality? Simple. It funds them or subsidizes them. Fund. It pays for them because the benefits are so great. So we see government funding education. We see government funding vaccines. No poor child in America will be denied the essential vaccines because the NIH pays for them because it's such cheap prevention and has such good effects. Externalities. The second thing I want to talk about is public goods and services. By providing or not providing these, the government somewhat reallocates resources. And whether or not a good is a public good that should be provided by the government depends on two things, which I'm going to abbreviate very shortly. One is excludability. If something is not excludable, it should likely be a public good. Let me give an example. Streetlights. Let's say you enjoy streetlights. You have a house on a street with streetlights, but you don't pay your taxes. You're what's known as a free rider. Can we exclude the light from you, but not your tax-paying neighbors? No. And so therefore, what private company would go into the business of providing that if they can't exclude the free riders? They wouldn't make a profit. The government, therefore, needs to provide that good. The other thing that determines perhaps whether something is a public good or service is shared consumption. Shared consumption. Now, I'll stick with the same example because it fits this as well. Streetlights. If something is shared consumption, then the government generally provides as a public good. Your enjoyment of the light, the street light, doesn't mean that your next door neighbor gets to enjoy less. It's shared consumption. One person's enjoyment doesn't diminish the amount of the service enjoyed by others. And therefore, that's the other thing that advocates for making it a public good. If it's a finite, tangible good, like food, well then you can that's excludable. You can exclude the non-payers from getting the food, and one person's enjoyment of the food means there's that much less food for someone else. So food is generally provided by private industry, whereas streetlights are public goods. Externalities and public goods. This is how the government, dealing with these is how the government reallocates resources.